For as long as she could remember, a heavy fog lay over the land. Her tiny village nestled in a valley carved between two rugged mountains, and forest blanketed the rocky slopes stretching endlessly away from the small clump of huts. The residents of the village moved always in a hazy mist, their clothing and hair wet and limp from its cloudy blanket. White sheets hid the tops of trees, and she moved through the forest as if through a great hall, with a ceiling of cloud, pillars of wood and bark, and a soft carpet of moss, damp and silent beneath her feet. Since the first gray light of dawn filtered down through the mist, she had been out in the forest, hunting. With any luck, she would return with a few hares or grouse, their downy and feathery coats darkened and slick with moisture. Somewhere beyond the hazy rows of trunks, fallen leaves rustled as a creature made its way through the forest. She crouched in the underbrush, watching, holding her breath as the steps stopped and neither hunter nor prey moved. A soft chuffing floated through the trees. Deer. Her grip tightened on her bow. Scent hung heavy in the mists, and deer avoided the forests near the village, but a harvest like that could feed them for days. The chuffing stopped, and the steps resumed. Through the mist hanging between the trees, a dark form moved up the slope, antlers glistening white in the flickers of light filtering to the forest floor. Her arrow would never strike true in the thick undergrowth, so she crept after it, drawn forward by the occasional chuff and the dull crunch of hoofs on damp leaves. A breeze brushed her cheeks as it floated past her, carrying her scent away from her prey. The stag moved onward, stopping to lift its great head to the wind, its grunting breaths making her hold her own until their journey resumed. The ground became slick, and the air hot and heavy as they climbed. The fog grew thick until even the leaves beneath her leather shoes vanished, and the mist swirled around her like white phantoms. The stag, sniffing the air or moving through the undergrowth, were all that led her timid steps forward. The heat in the air grew stifling. She was about to turn back, giving up all hope of bringing down the stag, when the rush of water filled the air. Curious, she fought her way through the mist, and the rush grew to a roar, then a thunder shaking the earth beneath her feet. The stag snorted behind her, and she whirled to see his dark figure framed against the white walls, watching her before he darted back into the fog. A gust of wind sent the mist swirling away, and she saw now that it danced over nothingness. A deep chasm opened into the earth, water cascading into it, and she stood only inches from its edge. Holding a tree branch, she leaned out to gaze into the pit, the scorching mist burning her face. At the bottom, dizzyingly far below, a red mass heaved and spat as the water poured into it, and billows of steam belched up. She stared into the heart of the earth until her eyes ached with the heat of it. When she finally pulled herself back from the edge, she turned her steps toward the village, searching for the steady decline of the ground under her feet. The stag had seen her, and morning had long since passed. Her furs were drenched, and she shivered as the air began to cool around her. The trees grew tall again, but she recognized none of them, and she went on more and more disoriented until she had no hope of finding her way back to the village. She stopped to free a pebble from her shoe, and when she looked up, the stag was standing at the edge of the swirling mist. With a snort, he spun, rushing into the fog. When she again made her way forward, he again stood watching, and with another snort, he retreated into the white mist. She found herself led slowly onward by his ethereal form, the ground sloping away beneath her feet until the trees ended and she stumbled into a familiar clearing. It was the field of browning grasses around the village, the blades wilted beneath the heavy fog. The stag stood at the edge of the forest, the tall grass brushing the hide over his ribs, darkened with moisture. Dropping to one knee, she notched an arrow and drew back her bow with cold fingers, the tip trained over the creature's heart. But the stag stood still, and she let the bowstring loosen, dropping the bow to her side. With a snort and a toss of his head, the stag galloped away, back into the fog.
Today's episode of Tiny Tales was written and narrated by R.E. Rule. Music and production by Frank Nawrot. Thanks for listening.